911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, but the woman on the other end was anything but. There's a dangerous man trespassing in our neighborhood. He refuses to leave. The urgency in her voice was laced with the kind of entitlement that made dispatchers roll their eyes. Cut to a tall, broad-shouldered man standing in front of a house, scrolling through his phone. His face was unreadable, his demeanor calm. The supposed dangerous man was me, and the house was mine. I sighed, glancing at my watch. It hadn't even been 24 hours since I moved in, and I was already dealing with a false police report. Fantastic. A few minutes later, I heard the telltale sound of police sirens approaching. My own officers. This was going to be interesting. Moving to this small town was supposed to be my fresh start. After years in law enforcement, both military and civilian, I'd finally been promoted to chief of police. The town was quiet, crime rates were low, and the biggest problems I expected to deal with were traffic disputes and the occasional drunk at the local bar. What I didn't expect was an overzealous HOA that acted like they were the real law. I had barely started unpacking when I met her. She arrived unannounced, a woman in her late 50s, short but commanding, marching up my driveway like she owned it. She didn't introduce herself at first, just stood there, arms crossed, scanning me like a security camera. I gave her a nod. "Can I help you?" She scoffed. "You're new here, aren't you?" I set the box I was holding down. "Just moved in." "That explains it." She pulled out a clipboard and clicked her pen. "I'm Karen, HOA president." "Ah, that explained it." She tilted her head, looking at my plain, undecorated yard like it was a personal insult. "You didn't get approval from the HOA before moving in?" I frowned. "I bought the house. Why would I need approval?" She exhaled dramatically, as if she were dealing with a slow child. "Because we have rules here. We maintain a certain standard. We need to ensure you meet our neighborhood expectations." "Right." I kept my face neutral. "Well, I'm not renting. I own the property, so I don't really need permission." Karen's nostrils flared. "Every homeowner must submit a request before moving in." "I see." I nodded thoughtfully. "And where exactly does it say that in the law?" She stiffened. I could see her mentally flipping through whatever HOA nonsense she memorized. "It's in the community guidelines." "That's nice," I smiled. "But legally, I don't need your approval." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes narrowed. It was clear she wasn't used to being challenged. "Well," she said after a pause, "you'll need to attend our next HOA meeting to discuss compliance." I shook my head. "Not interested." Her eye twitched. "Excuse me. I don't need to comply with a voluntary association. HOA membership wasn't mandatory in my purchase agreement." Karen's face turned an impressive shade of red. "You're going to regret that attitude, sir." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off. I exhaled, shaking my head. Didn't take long to meet the local tyrant. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong, because 5 minutes later, she called 911 on me. As I leaned against my truck, waiting for my officers to arrive, I could already picture the ridiculousness of the situation. Karen was across the street, arms crossed, whispering furiously with another neighbor. They glanced at me every few seconds like I was a threat to their entire existence. The sirens grew louder. I saw 2 squad cars roll into the cul-de-sac, their lights flashing. The moment they parked, Karen practically ran toward them. "Oh, thank goodness, officers. That man is trespassing, and he refuses to leave." The 2 officers, James and Patel, stepped out, looking confused. James adjusted his belt. Ma'am, you said who was trespassing?" "Yes." Karen huffed, pointing dramatically at me. "He won't leave." Patel looked over at me. I gave him a casual nod. His confusion deepened. "Ma'am, that's our new boss." Karen's entire face froze. "What?" Patel coughed. "That's the new chief of police, ma'am." Karen slowly turned to face me, her jaw tightening. I waved. "Hey there." For a moment, she just stood there, blinking. Then, in classic Karen fashion, she doubled down. "I don't care if he's the mayor," she snapped. "He's breaking HOA rules. Arrest him." James sighed. "Ma'am, HOA rules aren't enforceable laws." "They are our laws," she shot back. "And he is trespassing." James turned to me, giving me an almost apologetic look. Chief." I smiled. "I'd love to hear what law I broke." Karen scoffed. "Unauthorized residency." Patel looked like he was physically restraining himself from laughing. "That's not a law, ma'am." Karen's face was getting redder by the second. Then what about loitering?" I held up my house keys. "Loitering outside my own house." The neighbors were watching now. A few even chuckled under their breath. Karen knew she was losing, but she wasn't going down without a fight. If you won't arrest him, she huffed, then I'm filing a complaint. I folded my arms. Be my guest. James and Patel exchanged looks. Anything else, ma'am? James asked, tired. Karen glared at me one last time before storming off toward her house. The officers turned to me, both trying not to laugh. Hell of a first day, huh, Chief? Patel grinned. I sighed. Yeah. Welcome to the neighborhood, James said, shaking his head. I watched Karen disappear into her house, already plotting her next move. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The air was thick with awkward tension, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they've made a colossal mistake, but is too stubborn to admit it. Karen stood frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her brain was clearly short-circuiting, trying to compute what she had just been told. I was the new chief of police, the man she just called 911 on. A light chuckle escaped Patel. James shot him a warning look, but I could see the amusement flickering in his eyes too. They were both enjoying this way too much. Karen's face turned an impressive shade of red, but she wasn't one to back down. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and did what Karens do best. She doubled down. I don't care who he is, she snapped. If he wants to live here, he must obey HOA regulations. James sighed. Ma'am, as we've explained before, HOA rules are not actual laws. Karen scoffed, looking at him as if he had just suggested the earth was flat. They are laws, she argued. They exist to protect the character of the neighborhood. I raised an eyebrow. And which law, exactly, did I break? Karen's eyes flickered around like a malfunctioning slot machine, searching for anything that might back her up. She found nothing. Well, he's loitering, she finally blurted out. I held up my house keys. Loitering outside my own house. A murmur of laughter rippled through the gathering crowd of neighbors. More people had come out of their houses to watch the unfolding drama. Karen's jaw clenched, but she refused to let go of the bone she had bitten into. If the police won't handle it, she declared, then I'll personally file a report at the station. Patel raised an eyebrow. You want to go down to the station to file a report against the chief of police? Karen's nostrils flared. Yes. James sighed again, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not how this works. I demand a supervisor, she snapped. I smiled. You're talking to him. Karen blinked rapidly, like a computer about to overheat. Then I want to speak to your supervisor, she countered. James exhaled, looking like he was reconsidering all of his life choices. That would be the mayor, ma'am. Karen sniffed, crossing her arms. Then I'll be calling him next. I chuckled. Please do. He's the one who hired me. That was the final nail in the coffin. The last string of her argument snapped, leaving her with nothing but wounded pride and a crowd of entertained neighbors. For a second, I thought she might actually admit she was wrong. But no. Instead, she pivoted. Well, she huffed, brushing invisible dust off her sleeve. We'll just have to discuss this further at the next HOA meeting. I smiled. I won't be attending. Karen gasped like I had just insulted her ancestors. Excuse me. I don't have to, I said casually. HOA membership isn't mandatory for me. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Some looked surprised, like they just learned a forbidden secret. Others looked downright intrigued. Karen's eye twitched. Everyone in this neighborhood follows the rules. I shrugged. Not legally enforceable ones. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Karen's face. Her grip on power depended on people believing she was in control. If people started questioning that, if they started challenging her, that's when the whole system crumbled. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, James, still on the clock, cleared his throat. Well, Chief, he said, fighting back a smirk. I think it's safe to say there's no actual crime happening here. Nope, I shook my head. Just a misunderstanding. Karen bristled. This is far from over. She turned on her heel and stormed off toward her house. I exhaled. Well, that was fun. Patel chuckled. Welcome to the neighborhood, Chief. As the officers got back into their cars, the small crowd of neighbors began to mingle, discussing what had just happened. A man in his late 40s, wearing a hoodie and holding a cup of coffee, walked up to me. Dude, he said, shaking his head. That was the funniest thing I've ever seen. I grinned. She always like this. Oh, worse. He took a sip of coffee. She's been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. A woman next to him chimed in. We all just go along with it because it's easier. She finds people for the dumbest stuff. Yeah, the man added. Like my mailbox was 2 inches too tall. I frowned. She find you over a mailbox? Oh yeah, he laughed dryly. She made me change it. Cost me $300. I shook my head. She can't legally enforce those fines, you know. The neighbors looked at each other. What do you mean? The woman asked. I folded my arms. An HOA can only enforce fines if it's explicitly stated in the contract when you buy the house. If it wasn't in your original purchase agreement, they can't force you to pay. A long silence followed. Wait, the hoodie guy said slowly. Are you telling me I didn't actually have to pay that? Yep. His expression darkened. Oh, hell no. Karen had been ruling over this place like a queen with unchecked power, and nobody ever questioned it. Until now. A slow, mischievous smile spread across my face. Tell me something, I said, addressing the small group that had gathered. How many people here have paid fines to the HOA? Almost every single hand went up. I let that information sink in. Now, how many of you actually checked if they were legally binding? No hands went up. I chuckled. Yeah, thought so. The neighbors looked at each other, murmuring. The seed had been planted. Karen had no idea what was coming next. She thought this was over. It was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to a fine taped to my front door. Not a letter, not a warning. An official HOA violation notice in bold red ink. Violation notice. You have been fined $250 for the following infractions. Unauthorized parking, grass too tall, non-compliant mailbox, unapproved flagpole. I read the list twice, then a third time. I didn't even own a flagpole. I chuckled under my breath. Oh, this was going to be fun. I turned to head back inside when I spotted Karen standing across the street, arms crossed, watching me like a predator waiting for a reaction. I held up the fine and waved it at her. Morning, Karen. Lovely weather we're having. She didn't respond, just pursed her lips and walked off. Yeah, she thought this was a power move. I had other plans. I spent the next hour making a few calls. First, to my buddy Chris, an attorney specializing in HOA disputes. Let me guess, he said after I explained the situation. They're pulling fake violations out of thin air. Bingo. He chuckled. Well, good news. If you didn't sign an agreement making you subject to their fines, they legally can't enforce anything. I grinned. That's what I figured. Send me the fine, Chris said. Let's have some fun. After that, I called a local building inspector, one I'd worked with before, to check the so-called violations on my property. Spoiler alert, my grass was perfectly within height limits. My parking was legal, my mailbox was city-approved, and again, I didn't own a flagpole. By the time I was done, I had a whole case of evidence against the HOA. But before I made my next move, I decided to push Karen's buttons. That evening, I attended the HOA meeting uninvited. The moment I walked in, the room fell silent. Karen, sitting at the front like a medieval queen, clenched her jaw. This is a private meeting. I smiled. Actually, as a homeowner in this community, I have the legal right to attend. She stiffened but said nothing. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to being questioned. I took a seat in the back and watched as Karen rambled on about new HOA regulations. Then came the best part, the financial report. An older man, George, stood up to present the HOA's budget. It took all of 30 seconds for me to notice a massive discrepancy. I raised my hand. Karen sighed dramatically. What now? I gestured toward the budget sheet. Quick question. Why is there a $12,000 expense labeled administrative fees? A murmur spread through the room. Karen's face visibly twitched. That's standard, she said stiffly. Really? I leaned forward. Because I checked public records. The last 4 years have had an identical $12,000 charge. And funny enough, there's no breakdown of what those fees actually cover. The room erupted into whispers. Karen's face turned bright red. That information is confidential. I grinned. That's not how nonprofit financial disclosures work. Karen. She knew she was caught. I turned to the room. How many of you have paid HOA fines? More than half the homeowners raised their hands. I nodded. And how many of you actually checked if those fines were legally enforceable? Silence. Then someone muttered, wait a second. The dominoes were falling. I pulled a folder from my bag and held it up. I did some digging. Turns out, your HOA bylaws don't allow mandatory fines. Every single penalty you've paid, I smiled, was illegally collected. Karen shot to her feet. You are out of line. Am I? I tilted my head. Because I also checked the bylaws. And fun fact, you've been HOA president for 10 years. The murmuring grew louder. George, still holding the budget report, frowned. I thought the term limit was 4 years. It is, I said cheerfully. Yet Karen here has been re-elected, without a vote, for a decade. More murmurs. People turned to Karen, suspicious, angry, betrayed. Karen's hands clenched into fists. This meeting is over. She grabbed the budget papers and stormed out of the room. The board members sat in stunned silence. I smiled, leaning back. This was only the beginning. The room was a powder keg of murmurs, whispers, and side-eyes. Karen had just stormed out, clutching her precious budget reports like a villain in the final act of a crime thriller. But the damage had been done. For the first time in a decade, the HOA board wasn't looking at me like an outsider. They were looking at her, and they did not like what they saw. A heavy silence settled over the remaining board members. George, the HOA treasurer, adjusted his glasses. "Is this true?" he asked hesitantly. I leaned forward, spreading my hands. "Yep. Every HOA fine she's issued, illegally collected. The HOA bylaws specifically state that penalties must be voted on and approved by the board before they can be enforced." A woman in the second row gasped. "Wait, I got fined $500 for having a flower bed. She told me it wasn't in line with community aesthetics." Murmurs spread again. Another man raised his hand. "She fined me for parking in my own driveway." A woman toward the back stood up, red-faced. "I paid $1,200 over the years for rule violations. If this isn't legal, I want my money back." And just like that, the tide turned. Karen came storming back in, her face flushed with anger. "This meeting is over," she snapped, slamming the budget reports down on the table. "I will not sit here and be attacked." Nobody moved. Nobody agreed. George cleared his throat. "Karen, you've been HOA president for 10 years without an election. That's not legal." Karen's face darkened. "I've maintained order," she hissed. "Without me, this neighborhood would be chaos." I folded my arms. "Without you, this neighborhood would have an extra $12,000 a year in its budget." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Karen's nostrils flared. "I do not need to sit here and listen to this nonsense." She grabbed her bag. "If you people want to see what happens without my leadership, then fine. I quit." She turned on her heel and marched toward the door. And that's when the real twist happened. Just as Karen was about to leave, a deep voice spoke up. "Actually," George said slowly, "we need to vote on that." Karen froze. She turned, bewildered. "What?" George stood up, adjusting his tie. "You're still technically president, which means you have to formally resign in a recorded vote." Karen blinked. I just told you I quit." I smirked. "Then make it official." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She had spent years wielding HOA power like a medieval queen. She had terrorized people, fined them for nonsense, and lorded over the community like it was her personal kingdom. And now she was being forced to give up the crown. "Fine." She spat the word like poison. George cleared his throat. "All in favor of accepting Karen's resignation?" Every single hand in the room shot up. Karen made a choked sound, looking around in shock. Even some of her loyal board members had betrayed her. "Motion passed," George said, writing it down. "Effective immediately." Karen staggered back. She had just lost everything. Her power, her control, and worst of all, her authority over me. I gave her a little wave. "Guess that's it, huh?" Her eye twitched. Then, with one last glare, she spun around and stormed out the door permanently. The moment she was gone, the entire room burst into applause. A woman laughed. "This is the best HOA meeting I've ever been to." The guy with the coffee grinned. "This is better than cable." But it wasn't over yet, because now the community had questions. "What about our fines?" someone asked. I held up my phone. "Already spoke to a lawyer. Every fine collected outside of legal bounds can be challenged." A neighbor raised a hand. "And what about those missing HOA funds?" George hesitated. I think we need a full audit." More murmurs, more nods. The HOA board was crumbling, and Karen was officially powerless. As the meeting ended, I stood up to leave. George caught up with me, looking sheepish. "Listen, Chief, I just wanted to say we could really use someone like you on the HOA board." I laughed. "Not a chance." He nodded. "Yeah, figured." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Good luck cleaning up this mess." Then, with one last look at the destroyed remains of Karen's reign, I walked out. This neighborhood was about to get a whole lot quieter. But Karen? She wasn't done yet, and I had a feeling her meltdown wasn't over. Karen may have stormed out of the HOA meeting, but I knew better than to assume she was gone for good. People like her never accept defeat quietly. And I was right, because the next morning, she went nuclear. I woke up to a letter stuffed into my mailbox, bold and dramatic. "Cease and desist." To my name. "You have engaged in defamation and harassment against me, Former HOA President Karen last name. Your false accusations have damaged my reputation, and I demand you retract your statements immediately. Failure to do so will result in legal action. I actually laughed. She was suing me. For what? Exposing her corruption. I shook my head, pulled out my phone, and snapped a photo of the letter. Then I forwarded it to my attorney, Chris. 5 minutes later, he called me, laughing. Dude, he wheezed. This is the most Karen thing I've ever seen. I chuckled. So what are the legal consequences of calling out a fraudster? 0, Chris said. She has no case. The HOA records prove she violated the bylaws, and she resigned on record. Any reputation damage is on her. So should I just ignore it? Nah, he said. I say you file a counterclaim for harassment and report her for HOA fraud. That made me pause. Wait, I can actually do that? Oh, absolutely, he confirmed. We can submit a formal complaint with the state's HOA regulatory board and request a full forensic audit. A slow, mischievous smile spread across my face. Oh, I said, let's do that. While Chris got the legal wheels turning, Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. That afternoon, she tried to start a petition to reinstate herself as HOA president. She went door to door, ranting about how the neighborhood would crumble without her leadership. She even made flyers. Stop the chaos. Bring back Karen. Protect HOA integrity. Enforce community standards. Say no to anarchy. She knocked on at least 20 doors. Not a single person signed. Not one. At one point, she even approached George, the new interim HOA president, demanding a special vote. George, to his credit, just burst out laughing. Karen, he said, wiping his eyes, you're legally banned from running again. Your name is literally in the fraud report. Karen, absolutely livid, stomped away. But she had one last trick up her sleeve. 3 days later, I got a call from my officers. Chief, you might want to come down to the station, James said, his voice shaking with amusement. I frowned. Why? Karen's here, he said, chuckling. She's trying to file criminal charges against you. I blinked. For what? James coughed. She says you engaged in racketeering, theft, and conspiracy against the HOA. I stared at my phone. Then I sighed. All right, I'll be there in 10. When I arrived at the station, Karen was sitting at the front desk, arms crossed, glowering at Patel. The moment she saw me, she shot to her feet. There he is, she barked. That's the man who destroyed this neighborhood. I sighed. Karen, what exactly are you accusing me of? She jabbed a finger at me. You orchestrated a criminal coup to take over the HOA. I blinked. A coup? Yes. You illegally overthrew my presidency. I turned to Patel. Is that a real crime? Patel tried and failed to keep a straight face. No, Chief. That's not a thing. Karen huffed. Then what about racketeering? James folded his arms. Do you even know what that means, ma'am? Karen faltered. It means organized crime. I snorted. So, you think I'm running a mob operation against an HOA? Karen's eye twitched. Yes. At that point, Patel lost it. He bent over the desk, wheezing. James was shaking with laughter. Even the desk sergeant was covering his mouth. Karen's face turned bright red. You're all in on it, she accused, spinning around. This whole police force is corrupt. James wiped a tear from his eye. Karen, go home. She glared at me one last time before storming out the front door. I turned to Patel. You get all that on camera? He grinned. Yep. I laughed. Send it to Chris. I have a feeling it'll be useful. Karen finally disappeared after that. Turns out, the forensic audit uncovered years of misused HOA funds. She had been pocketing thousands of dollars for fake administrative fees, overcharging residents, and using HOA money for personal expenses. In the end, she was forced to pay back over $30,000. When she couldn't, the state seized her assets, including her house. That's right, Karen was evicted from her own self-proclaimed kingdom. And the best part? The HOA board used her recovered funds to refund the residents she had scammed. 3 months later, the neighborhood was unrecognizable, not because of any drastic physical changes, but because, for the first time in a decade, people were actually happy. No more Karen lurking around, clipboard in hand, waiting to ambush residents over nonsense violations. No more petty fines for mailbox heights, flagpoles, or the supposed unsanctioned color of a front door. No more fear. And the best part? The new HOA president, George, had completely restructured the association, making membership voluntary and all fines subject to legal review. Karen's reign of terror was officially dead. But that didn't mean she was done humiliating herself. After losing her home, Karen moved to a new neighborhood one town over. Within 2 weeks, she tried to start a brand new HOA. She printed flyers, knocked on doors, and held a community interest meeting at the local library. She even made herself president before a single vote was cast. But there was one tiny problem. The new neighborhood already knew who she was, thanks to a viral video of her HOA meltdown at the police station. Her entire history was public knowledge. Residents refused to join. Some even called the cops on her for harassment when she wouldn't take no for an answer. She was banned from at least 3 neighborhood Facebook groups before she finally gave up. Back in my neighborhood, things were better than ever. Thanks to the forensic audit, the HOA was able to recover over $30,000 from Karen's fraudulent accounts. Instead of hoarding the money, George announced that it would be used to refund homeowners who had been illegally fined. A big, HOA-wide barbecue party was held in the park to celebrate. Someone even made a piñata shaped like Karen's clipboard. I took one solid swing at it, purely for cathartic purposes. It exploded into pieces. The crowd cheered. A few months later, I was grabbing coffee at the mall when I saw her. Karen, wearing a mall security uniform, standing at the entrance like a gatekeeper to a suburban kingdom that no longer existed. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked miserable. Her once pristine, ironed-out fits had been replaced with a polyester security vest, her signature clipboard gone. Instead, she held a walkie-talkie, staring blankly at teenagers loitering near the food court. The irony. She finally got what she always wanted, a position of authority. Except now, nobody feared her. Nobody respected her. She was just another cog in a job she probably hated. I couldn't resist. As I walked by, I gave her a small, polite wave. Our eyes met. Her jaw clenched so tight, I thought she might break a tooth. And then, she turned away, pretending she didn't see me. I smiled. That was enough. Months later, I got one last update. Apparently, Karen tried one last desperate move. She attempted to sue the HOA board, claiming that they had illegally removed her from office. But the judge? He took one look at the case, laughed, and dismissed it in under 5 minutes. Her final appeal denied. Karen had officially lost everything. Her power, her money, her control. And in the end, nobody missed her. Karen thought she owned this neighborhood. She thought she could bully, threaten, and manipulate people forever. She thought she was above the law. But in the end, the law caught up with her. And now she's stuck yelling at teenagers for loitering near a sunglass hut. Poetic justice, don't you think? Now let me ask you something. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this? Or even worse, have you had a nightmare HOA experience of your own? Drop your craziest HOA or Karen story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this takedown, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more crazy stories just like this one. Because trust me, there are plenty more out there.